The sun rose over our empty house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like something broken. It just felt quiet. And sometimes quiet is the kindest ending of all. The last box sat by the door, taped shut with our final memories inside. I stood in the empty living room, running my hand along the mantel where our wedding photo used to sit. The walls echoed with every step, the house already forgetting us. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed tight against her chest. "You got everything?" "Yeah," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. There were things I'd never be able to take, the way the morning light used to catch her hair, the sound of her humming while she cooked, 23 years of shared history. She followed me out to the driveway where my truck was packed with boxes. The autumn air smelled like wood smoke and dying leaves. "You'll call when you get there?" she asked. I nodded, digging my keys from my pocket. They felt heavier than they should. Sarah reached out suddenly, her hand brushing my arm. "I'm sorry it ended like this." The touch startled me. It had been months since we'd touched without anger between us. "Me too," I said. Then, before I could stop myself, "Do you think we could have fixed it?" Her eyes grew distant. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed, David. Some loves are just seasons." I turned the keys over in my hand, the metal warm from my grip. All those years trying to make it work, all those second chances, and here we were, two people who knew each other better than anyone, walking away with nothing left to say. As I climbed into the truck, I caught our reflection in the rear view mirror. Sarah standing alone in the driveway of the house we'd bought together, me behind the wheel with nowhere to go but forward. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back as I pulled away. Not when I reached the stop sign at the end of the street. Not when I turned onto the highway. Because sometimes love doesn't end with a bang or a dramatic goodbye. Sometimes it just stops. And the bravest thing you can do is keep driving. Into the quiet, into the unknown, into a life you never planned on living. The road stretched out before me, empty and endless. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The moving van pulled away, leaving me standing in the driveway of a house I barely recognized. My new house. The keys felt foreign in my hand, too light without the familiar weight of the old brass key to her, place. Inside, the empty rooms echoed as I walked through them. No furniture yet, just sunlight streaming through bare windows, painting golden rectangles on fresh carpet. I set down my coffee cup on the kitchen counter, watching the steam curl upward in the quiet. My phone buzzed. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then let it go to voicemail. The hardware store clerk smiled when I walked in. "New place?" he asked, nodding at the basket of light bulbs and tools in my arms. "Yeah," I said. "First time living alone in decades." He chuckled. "You'll get used to it, might even like it." I doubted that as I drove home, but when I installed the new porch light that evening, something unexpected happened. As I tightened the last screw and flipped the switch, watching the warm glow spill across my front steps, I realized this was mine. Every choice, every mistake, every quiet moment belonged to me alone. The next morning, I woke with the sunrise. No arguments about the thermostat, no tiptoeing around someone else's mood, just coffee in my favorite mug and the newspaper spread across a clean table. At the park that afternoon, an older man nodded to me from a neighboring bench. "Beautiful day," he remarked. I looked up at the blue sky. "Yeah," I agreed. "It really is." That night, when Sarah called again, I answered. Her voice sounded smaller somehow. "How's the new place?" I glanced around at the half-unpacked boxes, a single lamp casting soft light against the wall. "Different," I said, "but good." Silence stretched between us. Then quietly, "I'm glad." We hung up without our usual sharp goodbye. I sat in the growing dark, listening to the crickets outside my new home. The road ahead was unfamiliar, but for the first time in years it felt like mine to travel. Sometimes life doesn't give you a second chance with what you lost. Sometimes it gives you something better, a fresh start, and the quiet courage to take it. We sat up all night talking, not the frantic, hopeful talks we'd had before, but quiet, exhausted ones. The kind where you finally say the things you've been too afraid to admit. "I think," I said slowly, as dawn crept through the blinds, "we've been trying to fix the wrong thing." She looked at me, waiting. "We keep trying to fix us," I continued. "But maybe some things aren't meant to be fixed. Maybe they're just over." She didn't argue. She just reached over and took my hand, and we sat there as the sun rose, holding on to each other one last time. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for when we moved in together that September, but it was the one we needed. Sometimes trying again doesn't mean fixing what was broken. It means finally having the courage to let it go. The argument started over nothing, a misplaced set of car keys, but by the time the sun set through our kitchen windows, it had unraveled into something far worse. "You never listen," Susan shouted, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. "I do listen," I shot back. "I just don't always do what you want." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw her flinch. We'd had this fight before. The same words, the same wounds reopened. The calendar on the wall still showed June, but I could already see all our tomorrows stretching out exactly like today. Susan sank into a chair, the fight draining from her. "This isn't working, is it?" I stared at the familiar scuff mark on the floor near the refrigerator, the one from when we'd moved in 15 years ago. We'd promised to fix it, never did. Outside, our neighbor's sprinklers kicked on with their familiar whir. The smell of cut grass drifted through the screen door. Everything was so ordinary, so painfully the same. "We've been trying for 20 years, I said quietly. Susan looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Some things don't change, do they?" I thought about all our attempts, the counseling sessions, the romantic getaways, the promises whispered in the dark. How we kept hoping love would be enough to bridge the gaps between who we were and who we wished we could be for each other. The truth settled over me like a heavy coat. "No," I said. "Some things don't." Susan nodded slowly, a single tear tracing down her cheek. There was relief in that nod, the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending. That night, lying in bed with the space between us wider than ever, I realized something terrible and beautiful. Love isn't always enough. And accepting that isn't failure. It's the bravest truth two people can face together. The next morning, we drank our coffee in silence, watching sunlight creep across the kitchen table we'd bought as newlyweds. For the first time in years, there was no pretending between us. Just the quiet understanding that some roads only lead one way, forward but not together. The house was too quiet when I came home. No TV humming in the living room, no dishes clinking in the sink, just the hollow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I found Diane sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, staring at nothing. "You're still up," I said, setting my keys on the counter. The sound made her flinch. She didn't look at me. "We need to talk." I'd heard those words enough times to know what came next. My stomach tightened as I pulled out the chair across from her. The vinyl seat creaked under my weight, the same sound it had made for 23 years. Diane finally met my eyes. "I can't do this anymore." The clock ticked. 3 seconds. 4. Some part of me had known this was coming. We'd been circling this moment for months, maybe years. "I called my sister," she continued. "I'm going to stay with her for a while." Outside, a car passed by, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen walls like a searchlight. I watched the shadows dance over Diane's face. The woman I'd loved since college, now a stranger sitting across from me. What about counseling? The words sounded hollow even as I said them. She shook her head slowly. We've tried that, Mark. 3 times. The truth of it settled between us. We'd run out of second chances. Upstairs, I pulled the old suitcase from the closet, the one we'd used on our honeymoon in Hawaii. Diane stood in the doorway, watching as I folded her sweaters, the ones I'd bought her for Christmases past. You don't have to help, she said softly. I know. But I kept packing. It was the last thing I could do for her. When the taxi arrived at dawn, we stood together on the porch. The morning air smelled like rain and freshly cut grass. Diane hesitated, her hand on the car door. I'm sorry, she said. I nodded. Me too. But as I watched the taillights disappear down the street, I realized something unexpected. The ache in my chest wasn't just grief. It was relief. Relief that the fighting was over, that we'd finally stopped hurting each other. I stared at the water stain on my ceiling, the one shaped like Texas that we'd joked about when we first bought the house. How many times had we had this conversation over the years? How many fresh starts that ended up right back where we began? Talk about what? I asked gently. What's the weather? The kids? Or all the ways we couldn't make each other happy? She didn't answer right away, but I could hear her breathing, could picture the way she'd be biting her lower lip like she always did when she was upset. I think, I said carefully, what we miss isn't each other. Not really. We miss who we used to be. We miss not seeing the cracks yet. A car passed outside, its headlights painting slow arcs across my bedroom wall. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I should go, she whispered finally. Yeah, I agreed. Good night, Linda. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the nightstand, the screen going dark again. The house felt suddenly enormous around me, every creak of the floorboards too loud. Part of me wanted to call her back, to say, wait, let's try one more time, but I'd made that call before. We both had. I got up and walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The streetlights made the wet pavement shine like black marble. Somewhere out there, Linda was sitting in her apartment, maybe looking out her own window, thinking the same thoughts. We'd loved each other once, deeply, completely. But love wasn't always enough. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do was let go completely, even when every fiber of your being wanted to hold on. I turned away from the window and climbed back into bed. The sheets were cold where I'd been lying. The rain kept falling outside, steady and quiet. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Some phone calls didn't need to be answered. Some doors were better left closed. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was nothing at all. The movers had just left when Karen walked through the front door, her arms full of grocery bags. She stopped in the foyer, her eyes scanning the half-unpacked boxes, the furniture that didn't quite fit in this smaller house. Feels strange, doesn't it? She said, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. I nodded, running my hand along the back of the couch. Our couch, the one we'd bought 15 years ago for our first house. It looked out of place here, like a relic from another life. I got the good coffee, she said, holding up the bag. The kind you like. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. We were trying again. After 2 years apart, after the divorce papers had been signed and the separate lives had been lived, we were standing in a new kitchen, pretending we could start over. That first night, we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, the September air just cool enough to remind us summer was ending. Karen tucked her feet under her on the wicker chair, the way she always had. Do you think we're crazy? She asked suddenly. I swirled the wine in my glass. Probably. She laughed, but it was thin, nervous. We could make it work this time. We know what went wrong now. I wanted to believe her, but I remembered the last time we'd said those words 2 years before the divorce, when we'd gone to counseling. We'll do better. We'll try harder. The weeks passed. We fell into old routines, me making breakfast on Sundays, her folding my laundry but still leaving my socks inside out. Small things, normal things. But I noticed the way she tensed when I came home late from work, the way I still braced for criticism when I loaded the dishwasher wrong. One night in October, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me, a photo of us at the beach years ago, our skin sunburnt, our smiles easy. "We looked happy," she said softly. "We were happy," I said. "For a while." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "Why couldn't we stay that way?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but it wasn't one either of us wanted to hear. The cracks started showing again by Thanksgiving. A snapped comment about my mother's stuffing recipe. A silent car ride after a party where she'd laughed a little too long at an old friend's joke. We were stepping carefully around each other, like people walking on ice that was already beginning to thin. Then, one night in December, it happened. A stupid argument about Christmas plans turned into something uglier, words we'd sworn we wouldn't say again hanging in the air between us. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her wipe angrily at her tears. "This isn't working," she said, her voice breaking. And the terrible thing? I wasn't even surprised. I signed the papers on a Tuesday. The lawyer's office was too quiet. Just the hum of the AC and the scratch of my pen. John Michael Carter. The ink looked too dark, too final. Across the desk, Susan sat perfectly still. No tears, no last-minute plea, just the same tired resignation I'd seen in her eyes for years. "You want to keep the house?" I asked, more out of habit than hope. She shook her head. "Too many memories." I knew what she meant. The kitchen where we'd argued over bills, the porch where we'd stopped sitting together, the bedroom where silence had grown thicker than the dark. The lawyer slid the papers into a folder. 6 weeks for processing, then it's official. Outside, the sky was flat and gray. Susan hugged her coat tighter. "You'll be okay?" I almost laughed. That was the question, wasn't it? After 23 years, did either of us even know how to be alone? "I'll manage," I said. She nodded, hesitated, then turned toward her car. No goodbye. Just the click of her heels on the pavement. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the courthouse. Some part of me had expected, what? A last-minute miracle? A sudden rush of clarity? But there was nothing. Just the weight of the keys in my hand and the hollow ache in my chest. That night, I poured a drink and dug out an old photo album. There we were, young, smiling, arms wrapped around each other at the lake. Susan's hair was blowing in the wind, and I was squinting against the sun like I didn't have a care in the world. I traced the edge of the photo. When did it change? Was it the layoff? The kids leaving? Or had we just slowly become strangers sharing a bed? The phone rang. My brother, Mike. "You sign?" "Yeah." "Good." A pause. "You need anything?" I looked around the empty living room. "Nah. I'm good." We both knew I was lying. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through the blinds. For one stupid second, I reached for Susan, then remembered. The bed was cold on her side. I made coffee, 1 mug instead of 2. The silence was louder than I expected. And then it hit me. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the story I'd told myself, that if I just held on, just tried harder, we'd find our way back. But some roads don't circle around. Sometimes you just run out of map. I took my coffee outside. The morning air was sharp, clean. A new day, a blank page. For the first time in years, I didn't know what came next. And maybe that was okay. The rain tapped against the bedroom window when the phone rang. I'd been half asleep, caught in that foggy place between dreams and waking. The blue light of my phone screen cut through the darkness. Linda Home, it read in bold letters. My ex-wife. After 14 months of silence, there her name was, pulsing in my hand like a heartbeat I'd almost forgotten. I sat up slowly, the old springs of my mattress groaning beneath me. My thumb hovered over the answer button. The divorce had been final for nearly a year now. The last time we'd spoken was when she came to collect the rest of her books from the garage. "Tom?" Her voice came through the receiver, softer than I remembered, edged with something uncertain. I'm sorry it's so late. I glanced at the clock. 11:43 p.m. It's all right, I said, though it wasn't. My mouth felt dry. Everything okay? A pause. Then that familiar half laugh of hers, the one that never quite reached her eyes. I was driving past Sam's Diner today. Remember their apple pie? Of course I remembered. The cracked red vinyl booths, the smell of grease and coffee that clung to our clothes afterward. How she'd always steal a bite of my pie, then pretend she hadn't when I caught her. Yeah, I said, my fingers tightening around the phone. You used to say their coffee tasted like burnt tires. Still does, she said, and for a moment it was like no time had passed at all. Then the silence settled between us again, heavy with all the things we weren't saying. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the roof. I could hear the faint sound of her television in the background, some late-night show with canned laughter that felt too loud for the hour. I miss you, she said suddenly. The words hung in the air between us. I closed my eyes and saw her standing in our kitchen that last morning, sunlight streaming through the window behind her as she packed the last of her mugs into a cardboard box. I can't keep doing this, Tom. We can't keep doing this. Linda, I started, then stopped. My throat felt tight. What do you want from this? Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. I don't know. I thought maybe we could talk. Maybe meet for coffee sometime.